What is up? You are watching the Lax Factor Lacrosse Coaches Q&A. It's the first episode that we're doing of this where I take two questions from, usually it's going to be kind of a private Facebook coaches group or something like that, or sometimes from comments, and I'm going to answer them. A lot of times these are going to be geared towards young coaches. Sometimes it's going to be kind of back and forths or just discussion starters for more experienced coaches. But the idea being we're going to talk lacrosse. We're going to talk lacrosse from a coach's perspective. And my experience in this regard is unique in the sense that from the time I was in 8th grade until I was a senior in high school, I actually got to coach a youth club team. Started as 8, 9, and 10-year-olds, and my varsity lacrosse coach who ran the youth club allowed us to travel up the program with that group of kids. So we started coaching them when they were 8, 9, and 10-year-olds. Then they were 11 and 12-year-olds playing at that level. And they were 13, 14, and 15-year-olds. So we actually were coaching near high school kids when we were just juniors and seniors in high school. I say we, my longtime buddy and assistant coach when I was coaching at Broome Community College was in that boat with me. We both started coaching those teams together and traveled up. And from there, I ended up coaching varsity lacrosse as an assistant. I started as a JV assistant, and then halfway through that season got moved up, and I helped the varsity as well at Shenango Forks High School, won a sectional championship there. And then I coached 2 years as a varsity assistant at Whitney Point. We won a sectional championship there also, beating Shenango Forks twice that season. And then from there, I went on to be the head lacrosse coach at Broome Community College for 6 years, racked up 55 wins over that 6-year span, coached a bunch of great kids, had a bunch of great teams, and had a lot of fun. So I've coached a lot of lacrosse, but I think all in between varsity and college lacrosse coaching, it was 10 years. I coached 5 years of youth club lacrosse. Then I coached a lot of travel teams and club teams outside of that, varying age groups, and I also officiated for 2 years. So there really isn't a side of this game that I haven't seen. I officiated officially for 2 years, did a lot of modified JV and varsity games, and then I also officiated as a kid, doing a lot of club games and things like that. So I've been all over the place. I have a very unique perspective in the sense that I've covered all aspects of the game. I've coached at all levels of the game. And so that's it. So let's get into the first question. And this one, I found this as I see this a lot in the lacrosse coaches groups, and it's coaches trying to figure out how to take their trash teams and get them some wins. And one thing in my coaching career, and maybe this is unique to my coaching career, but I think a lot of coaches are in this boat. I was never that coach that ever coached my team to a win. The teams that I had, I was lucky enough to have a lot of really good teams, but what I always used to say was the teams I had, they were going to win the games they won without me, and they were going to lose the games they lost with or without us also. I always said that maybe the games we won by a few more goals because, from an offensive perspective, I was a decent offensive coach, and we played a fun style of lacrosse that the kids seemed to be attracted to. So I'd say there was games where maybe we won by a couple more games than they would have won if they had a lesser coach. And on the same sense, maybe there was some games we would have lost or won by more or less, depending also. But I never put a whole lot of stock in me helping decide the outcome. And a lot of coaches, they put far too much stock in you and the outcome, when the reality is you're just preparing these guys. You can do the best you can, but in the end, it's the team that goes out and wins or loses the game. So that's a simplified way to look at it. But I think that one of the first things coaches need to do is kind of remove themselves from it and stop playing this as if you think you're going to take your team okay, good example. You lose to a team by 10. That team goes out and they lose to another team by 10. On paper, that team should beat you by 20. There is almost nothing as a lacrosse coach that you're going to do to be able to get a team to beat a team that should beat you by 20. If you're playing a team that's supposed to beat you on paper by 20, in almost every scenario, that team is probably going to beat you by 20. You might be able to stall the ball out, for instance, and save some goals and only lose by 17. And we famously had to play Onondaga Community College all 6 years that I was coaching at Broome. My first year, we lost 20-3. That was okay. Second year, when Onondaga was crazy, and I believe they went on to win the national championship for the first time that year, I think they beat us 24-3. And my third year, when they were even better, they beat us like 27-3. We were ranked. We were a top 10 team in JUCO. We beat teams that badly, but there was nothing on that game day that we were going to do to get within, 10, 15 goals of Onondaga at that stage. Sometimes your team just stinks and you have to eat it. Now, in those scenarios, what do? You have to make it fun at that point. If your team stinks and it's not because of a lack of effort, it's just due to the fact that you lack quality on the roster, this is not their bad that they're losing these games. This is not your bad that they're losing these games. This is just a matter of, this is how the world works. The world sucks if you're ugly, and it's really great if you're good looking, or at least better if you're good looking. You can make the same argument with lacrosse. The world sucks, or has the capability of sucking if you as a lacrosse team stink, but you can still make the most of it, is the point. You can still make it fun. Make sure you're not riding them into the dirt for losing a game as long as the effort's there. I saw one coach actually talk about how he wanted to try to create in-game goals, try to get 20 shots off of feeds in a game or over time, see how long it takes them. Terrible idea. Don't try to get tricky in the games, because then they're just going to get their asses whooped worse, and that's not fun for anybody. So when your team stinks, what do? You go back to the basics always. You try to put them in more game-like situations in practice. I tended with lesser teams to want to do more transition-based things in practice. Try to keep the long poles involved in the transition game drills that you may do. There's a lot of 3-on-2s, 4-on-3s, 5-on-4s, a lot of up, man down kind of scenarios, a lot of things that you can do to just kind of keep the practice going, give the offensive guys a little bit of confidence by putting them in man up, man down situations. Make sure that from a clearing perspective, just like you're simulating transition for the offensive guys in 3-on-2, 4-on-3, 5-on-4 situations, on the defensive side, have a clearing drill that's kind of like a game where it's 4-on-3 for the defenders to clear. So you have 3 defenders and a goalie trying to clear against the 3 attackmen, and it's just that half of the field. So you can put them in smaller situations in practice to give them the little wins, show them that when you do have that extra man, this is how you move the ball, and that'll translate into a few more successful clears come game time. That'll translate into a few more garbage goals or transition goals come game time. And I think that's when you have a bad team, those scenarios are the best ways to improve your team overall. You teach your defense how to better defend transition situations and transition plays, assuming you're giving a lot of them up as a stinker of a team, then they're going to shave a few goals off in the end, because, you know, that 9th fast break that you give up in that game, something's going to click, and all of that practice you spent working on that transition stuff is going to benefit you in the sense that you'll get an extra stop that you may not have gotten before. The other key to this transition odd man practice routine is it's a little bit more fun. Our guys never had more fun in practice when we were doing the fast pace, up and down the field transition drills, fast break drills. There's a drill we used to call the Duke drill, where it starts as a 4-on-3 fast break. Then you throw the goalie or whatever defender picks it up, you throw it to a midi waiting at the next side. He's got a 4-on-3 going back the other way, but that midi trailer is chasing. And if he catches up, now you've got a 4-on-4 until the ball is turned over. Then that goalie or the defender throws the ball to a waiting midfielder the other way. He goes back, another 4-on-3, and then both middies trail. So you're adding one guy into the mix each time. On one side, they're always playing man up as part of it. The other side, they're always playing even once the break situation's over, and that drill is a ton of fun. So when you have stinker teams, you have to figure out a way to make practice fun, because if the games, if you're going to lose the games, that's okay. These are kids. Kids are not pansies. Kids are extremely tough. So if you lose a game, that's fine. That's okay. The kicker being, it's the practice at this point that you need to use to try to make them better, but you need to do so in a way that makes that fun. Something has to be fun. And I've been a part of loser teams. My freshman year in high school, we were 2-11, I think. My sophomore year in high school, we were 2-11. We had cool coaches, and it was just fun playing for them. We were just glad to be there. Now, granted, we played for a perennial stinker, and we were actually the first group of kids to come up from the youth club in our program and actually start playing JV and varsity. So for us, there was this weird thing that was, cool about it anyway, because we knew we were kind of pioneers in our school of the, in terms of being the first team that actually was capable of winning. And then come my sophomore year, we're 5-7. My senior year, we go 11-3 in the regular season, finish 11-4, lost in the sectional finals. So our coaches made it fun for us. My senior year, we got a new coach. He was our longtime youth club coach, and he was our varsity coach. He made it fun for us. He was one of the greatest guys that you'll ever meet on a lacrosse field. He's one of the most beloved coaches that has ever coached a sport at my high school, Whitney Point. His name's Dave Ballard. The guy's great. Everyone that ever played for him pretty much loved him. And he rode me relentlessly into the ground, and I still loved the guy. So make it fun. That's what he did. That's what my other coaches did. I have been lucky enough to never have to coach a stinker. I only had one losing season at BCC. I took over a 2-7 team that had to fold halfway through the year. So my first year we turned it around and we went 7-5. My second year we had a 10-win season. So my next 4 years after my first season, we had 10-win seasons every year. And then we had a losing season my last year. But what I will say about that team was we tried to make it fun. It was hard because we had competitors on that team and they didn't want to lose. I was never used to losing either. So it was hard that year. And by the end of the year, we were all vexed. And my biggest regret about that season was that we overvalued our talent in the sense that we knew we had talent, but we were lacking that killer on offense. We actually had a killer on offense, Alex Hodges. He ended up playing at, where did he play? Catawba. 2 years after he played for us for 2 years, but he had mono at the beginning of the season, and that set him back quite a bit. So that kind of sidelined our offense, our offense's ability to really have that guy that when we needed a goal could get it, and we lost a lot of close games that year. And I think we finished 5-7. But what I always said about that season was, other than my first season coaching at Broome, which was probably the most fun I had because it was new and fresh, and it was like that for both me and the players and I regret not realizing that it just was what it was. We didn't lose a single game due to a lack of effort. That team that finished 5-7, we had more guys show up at practice on a regular basis that year and play hard. They were the most coachable team that we ever had. We just lacked a little bit of depth was all. And I regret not making sure that we recognized that as coaches and that we made it a little bit more fun for these guys. And maybe we wouldn't have lost a couple of the games that we lost on the stretch had we shifted focus from trying to be the team we thought we were going to be, which was another ranked season and another playoff appearance, and we weren't that. And I think that we frustrated the players with our own lofty expectations that they were unable to meet, but it wasn't their bad. It wasn't our bad. It's just what it was. But I never had a team that I didn't love. I had a couple of players that I didn't love, and I know I've had a lot of players that didn't love me. But that was the only regret as a coach that I actually had was not being a little softer on that team towards the end of the year as it became apparent we weren't going to finish above 500. Another question that coaches have been throwing around in this board was how do you mix up your midfield lines? When you have, let's say you have 6 midfielders on a varsity team or a JV team or even a modified team for that matter. This could go for youth too. If you don't have depth throughout, how do you break those lines up? Do you go with one quality line and one lesser line? Do you try to put quality on both lines? This was my 6-year career at Broome. This was my 4-year career coaching at the varsity level. I never coached a team that had more than 20, 22 guys on it. Most of the time, even at Broome, we had 18 to 22 guys. That's a junior college team. So we always had this scenario, and we would always do a mix. My 6 years at Broome is a good example. We always had 2 really solid midfielders, and then we had probably 3 or 4 role-playing middies. We didn't really run lines. Our goal, and I think at the start of my Broome career, we still had the horn where you could kind of get guys in and out on the horn. And then when we had to sub on the fly, we would do this too, but we would line them up on the sideline. So we had lines and we tried to practice in those lines and we tried to mix it up. We would have a killer line that was our 3 best midfielders. We would use that and as whenever we could. Whenever we could put the 3 best midfielders on the field when they had legs, we would do so. Then we would have our kind of made up lines where it's like, okay, hey, here's our A line that's mixed and here's our B line that's mixed, where we tried to make it a little more even. And mostly what we ended up doing was we would just create a line behind the coaches of 6 midfielders that were ready to go in. And every once in a while I'd turn around and I'd see the mix that I had and I would bump one guy from the second spot in line to the third to try to even it out, so that as we were sending middies on the field, we made, because we wouldn't always send a whole line. Sometimes we'd just bring one guy off. Guys would come off the field as they got tired. So what we would do is send one guy off the field and then send the next guy on. And then if we saw, oh, wait, we're going to send two lower level mids on, we need to get that guy who just came off and put him in second. So we would just mix that up and we would kind of just run them together. Now, that the downside to that was we didn't have midfielders playing together all the time, all year, but that's kind of crap. I mean, once you get into a game and you're in practice, these guys are getting enough reps together, and the offensive schemes we ran were simple enough that it didn't matter who you were on the field with. So sometimes you have no choice but to mix and match. And when we had to mix and match, we kind of would go away from the line concept and we would just put guys on the field in groups that we thought worked. And conditioning is key. When you don't have depth at midfield, you need to run those dudes into the ground in practice, because the reality is if you're the better conditioned team, some of these lesser midfielders can give you quality minutes in terms of D midfield shifts. They can give you quality minutes in terms of just being on the field long enough to give other guys rest. But if you can keep your big cats healthy, and if you can keep your big cats in ridiculous shape so that they can just be on the field most of the time, do that. We would do that all the time. When I coached at Whitney Point, we had two freaks. I'm going to name drop here. We had two freaks, Tony Ballard, who was an All-American, and Chris Hand, who would have been an All-American and deserved to be an All-American if it wasn't for the way it works, in our section, where they're not going to give an All-American award to a single team 2 years in a row. It was very weird and political, albeit they tried to make it fair, so I'm not going to knock them for that. But we had two ridiculous midfielders, all-American caliber talents. Hand was a face-off man who rarely lost a face-off. Ballard would play the wing, and he just had a motor like no one else. Ballard went on to play at Herkimer and then Oswego. Hand went up to Lemoyne and then Cortland, and I'm not sure what happened with him, but these kids at the high school level, just ridiculous athletes. And they played literally, no joke, 85% of every single game. They barely ever came off the field. Where they did get tired, we had so little depth at the midfield the year that Ballard was a senior. When they did get tired, a lot of times we would just have them hit attack, and we would send one of the attackmen up to run a defensive shift, because it wasn't like that attackman was going to play worse defense than our fourth or fifth midfielders would. So we, a lot of times, just to try to keep the best players on the field at all times, we'd let the midfielders get a rest on attack. That's not advised these days, and it's probably not the best thing for your team, but we were playing very competitive lacrosse and, trying to, get into the playoffs and try to win our league. And we did win our league 2 years in a row there. So moral of the story, don't overthink it. A lot of coaches overthink the hell out of everything, and you don't need to. What's going to be best for that scenario? Do that. In our case, going with lines was never going to be best for our scenario. That year at Whitney Point, we ran, I think, 4 midfielders primarily that year. Maybe we'd go into 5 if you counted the pole, but we only ran 4 short stick midfielders and a 5th pole, and our 2 top middies pretty much just played 85% of the game. So you may not be able to pull that off, and you may have to go with more of a line structure, or just like I said, put them in the sideline in the order that you want to sub them in. And in practice, do similar things. Make sure all these guys can play together. You can do a lot of 2-man game scenarios in practice to start getting these guys comfortable, and you kind of just want to warp your practice and your offensive scheme around how you're going to have to sub, who you're going to have to play with whom, and that way you can actually practice those guys together, even if they're not on the same line running at the same year. You put them in enough scenarios in practice that it's going to be fine, and especially at the level here. We were playing JUCO, which is not high quality lacrosse. We had a quality lacrosse team, and we played a lot of quality teams, but once you got outside of the top 15 of JUCO when I was there, the quality dropped off drastically, to the point that there were weekends where we were playing teams that wouldn't have beat mid-level varsity teams. So at our level, we were able to do a little bit more, and depending on how we play, who we played that weekend, it would work or it wouldn't work. But just don't overthink it. Look at your personnel. Figure out what the heck you need to do with that personnel. Try it out. If things work, run with it. Don't overthink these things. Kids are tough. Kids' feelings are typically not hurt as long as you're making things fun. A lot of times the kids don't even really care about the playing time as long as you're making the payoff for being on the team worth it. So don't overthink it. Realize that your kids are tough. Realize that sometimes you just have to do what you have to do to make it work, and then sometimes your team's just going to stink and there's nothing you can do about it.